Production.
Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have also from Central Florida, Professor Pixel. Of course, Pixel, everybody knows that we're broadcasting live from the Pine Hills Palace, just west of Warrenlando, Florida, where Daisy and Max, my German, short-haired Czechoslovakian Reds, patrol the acreage I have out here, where I have a little tiny lake and some citrus trees and whatnot. Just one of the last remaining here in Orlando. It allows me to be up here in the command center, up in the tower, overlooking the grounds as things go on, so we can safely get extreme and talk about Dark Shadows, season 1, episode 11 of the revival from 1991. Our episode by episode review that we're closing in on the finish. The show where in the original version, all 1,000+ episodes, 1,200 to be exact. You've seen every one, and I've seen none, and so you've never seen this, and I've only seen it once. But again, a little backstory for everybody just popping in the chat right now. We've got one more episode to go on a TV show that got canceled in '91, being preempted for the Gulf War,
We
among
were
other
robbed.
things too. We were robbed, and being your host, Rob, I take that personally because I hate it when that has a negative connotation. And I will have to say this to sound like the negative Nelly for the first time in 11 episodes. This episode 11's got a lot of stuff going into it, and I think it's not good. I don't know if it's rushed. It's not fun. I don't mind it being dark and heavy like some of them, but this is probably the most soap opera-y episode, or the most information laden one, I think, in it. And it's just kind of not enjoyable. So to me, it's the worst episode of all of them, even though I like some things that go in it too. I was kind of stunned because I went, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like Dark Shadows. This feels like a police procedural, because there's a big courthouse thing into it, and I do not like courthouse scenes. I don't think they do very good movies. And overall, I really don't know what to expect with the last episode, if it puts an old knot on the bow or not. But right now, I'm thinking it doesn't. So, what's your initial take?
I wasn't quite prepared for that. I was going to make a joke. I don't know what you're talking about being in Florida. I'm in Collinsport, Maine right now, looking down Widow's Hill, and I could see. But no, I didn't
How many
expect
bodies are down there?
uh, many bodies, Rob. Many bodies. Okay. So episode 11, just to give my first thoughts before we actually go into what happens, what takes us along into the journey into Dark Shadows. I actually do enjoy courtroom scenes. So it's a mixed bag, because on one hand, yes, I'm enjoying that aspect of it. On the other, I had a little bit of a rediscovery, because like I said, I've seen all 1,225 episodes. So I know pretty much everything that we've seen. The story beats, I've gone through them before. But there's something major about halfway during this episode that just made my jaw drop, because it was like a core memory suddenly unlocked,
Right.
So I was just amazed by that. And on the other, there are major changes that I'm not sure how to feel, and I'm wondering if you're going to cheer, and we'll find out whenever we go ahead and start digging in.
Well, take us in. Just as a reminder for everybody, like I say, we're reviewing the revival from 1991, which those who are not familiar with Dark Shadows, it's actually a good consolidation of what happened over those 5-6 years that it was a daytime soap, and super popular, of course, at the time. My parents knew it. You're the young 20-something generation. I'm the 80s kid. So for me, I saw this as a young adult and thought, okay, I liked it enough where it made me be interested in the other one. Went, wow, there was some good stuff back then too. And I'm not trying to crap on it. I guess I was just surprised, and a part of me goes, maybe they knew at this point that they were getting canceled, so they wanted to try to tie it up. I don't know, but start us off and let's see what happens.
Alrighty. Well, we start off this episode not in the past. No, we start in the present. We go into the old house, and who is stalking during not the night, it's the day. But Joe Haskell. He has decided to face the horror of Collins Port, that is Barnabas Collins, on his own. He can't get the sheriff involved. Well, he'll take matters into his own hands. So with a wooden stake and a mallet to drive it in, he goes down into the basement of the old house, opens the coffin, and he gets ready to drive it through the heart. And then there is a sudden as not Barnabas. No, Barnabas is still fine. Joe is stabbed. I was not sure who it was going to be, but after a moment, it is revealed none other than Dr. Hoffman is holding the knife as Joe hits the ground. Willie soon comes in to realize, wait a minute, that door's open. So he rushes downstairs, sees Dr. Hoffman, and Dr. Hoffman yelling at him in French, which is terrifying, starts trying to stab him. But thankfully, Willie is able to hit her against the wall, and she wakes up. And I'll pause there before everything is explained to Barnabas that night.
I've crapped on him a little bit, but I've tried to support him. I actually felt a little bad here for Hunky Man Meat going down like that. And he went out like a punk, and of course, the doctor putting the knife in his back, or should I say, as the vessel who allowed that to happen, I should say. I'm like, okay, is this where they just run out of ideas and now looking to kill off key cast members for shock value? And summing up, that was my initial take on it. I do think that Fife, this is one of the earliest things the actor who plays him is he does such a good job. We talked about him getting beat and really bad in episode 1, and how he's just got that loyal puppy dog ambience about him here too. And I thought it was interesting how, of course, he feels bad for Barnabas. He's not mad at her too, which I've yet to see him pissed. So he just felt really sad. My feelings are almost kind of hurt a little bit. I was like, I don't get it. But obviously when she gets knocked out and they're sitting there talking, she's like, I have no idea what happened and all that. You actually get almost a mature conversation between the three of them, with Barnabas is like, yeah, it has to be Angelique, which people are just going Angelique now instead of really emphasizing the coolness of the name. And he just, here we're getting, like I said, the voodoo witchcraft coming across a couple hundred years of centuries, curses and stuff. And it's like, okay, but why did we have to kill him? I mean, I don't know. It's a dark and stormy night. We get the fog machines cranked up on the outside as we transition to the 17th century. But I think the surprise thing was, of course, that it was her doing it. So I don't know. How do you feel about it?
It's a surprise he dies, because in the original show, he did not. He actually had no clue that Barnabas was a vampire. At least not at this point. I think there is later down the line a short moment in a storyline that he realizes something's wrong with Barnabas, and then they cart him off to the crazy house in the distance.
Yeah. But didn't you feel like Carolyn, because she was under a spell again, that maybe should have been the one order? I think that's the
I thought
got
so.
you,
I saw the heels, so I thought, oh my gosh, is it Carolyn? Did Barnabas get her so infatuated that it's led to this? But no, it was already somebody who is totally obsessed with Barnabas.
Yeah.
But speaking of totally obsessed with Barnabas, we're back to 1790, where who else is laying down in the old house but Josette, and her entire family is looking for her. Where could she have gone? I do not know. So they go looking, and they are led into the old house by their own will to go ahead and grab her and take her back to Collins Port. Collins Wood. And that night, Barnabas wakes up. He goes into the room expecting her there, which was a little bit silly. Did you think she's just going to go ahead and stay there and just remain? But she wakes up in Collinswood and starts calling for Barnabas. Why did you bring me here? I must go. And you can see there is something in her as she just goes into a trance.
Yeah.
And out in the distance, even though Countess Natalie can't see, Barnabas is gnashing his teeth.
It's a good shot. I like it. Him licking his lips and all that. And where do we go from here? I mean, that's kind of the whole thing I'm thinking at this point, because we understand that we have these. I hesitate to say parallel timelines, but we have the one in the past and the one in the future, and how they're supposed to be lining up, and they seem to be doing that, which of course would have already happened 200 years ago, and blah blah blah. But ignoring all the issues with all that, it's a situation where I go, and I mentioned before, we didn't get much of her past early on. So even though she's gorgeous and beautiful and all that, we don't know much about her, but she's in prison, jail, whatever you want to call it. And I just don't give a shit. I don't feel any sense of like whatever, even with what is about to happen in this episode, as we'll find out and talk about in a few moments. But we do get Hunky Man Meat trying to go through this big whole trial situation with Trask in there, just totally owning the whole scene. And then they bring out our little device, the old address with the strange symbols that may say like machine double dryer, whatever it is. And it's just, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not a big fan of courtroom dramas because, one, they don't seem realistic, generally speaking, in any movie. Two, they're all movie five because they're not realistic. Most of them are boring. And three, it's, kind of silly. And of course, what do they do at the end? Even though there's that exchange of, it's just to think that it's witchcraft. No, I do believe that it is. And his statement merely, solidifies the concept of it. So we're just kind of like, whatever. And then what do we get? We get a surprise entrance in there just to only confound matters and bring it to what may be a legal conclusion here too. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care about this either. And again, this just feels forced to me. What do you think?
So I think it's just made to piss you off.
I'm not pissed. But
I mean,
maybe because
okay,
there's not
okay.
a campy element or a little hammy thing going on. We've talked about how we've liked a little bit of darker seriousness, but they've done a good job of kind of going back and forth a bit. But it feels like, they're dancing on the edge. Now they're like, oh, no, we're completely off it right now. And we're going to just show you how stern we can be rather than whatever. It's just, I guess the episodes have worked best when we've had relationships, no matter who they are and what's going on. We see how things are going on versus this particular scene or this particular episode, because the stuff in the back was cool. In the future, we've been several episodes in it, but it was when people were getting together and things were happening. Here it's just more of the data dump of information of like, okay, things have already happened, now what's the resolution of the storyline going forward? And that's where I think it stalls. And sometimes there's always like a catch up, and I call these the catch up scenes when you see them in TV or movies, where you get like two people like walking. Well, it's usually they're walking somewhere and they're talking and they're basically explaining to the audience everything that's going on, just to speed shit up and all that, rather than us watching it and kind of figuring that out. And that's what this feels like, and we've not really had a lot of them. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I also feel like it's important for the matter, because all of this that's happened, we've seen it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're watching this this episode, it's time for the people around to come to the realization of this is happening here. This is happening here. There's a moment where Naomi Collins loses herself, and she gets caught up in Trask's words, and she says as much. And she says, "Why did you do this to my children?" And you feel bad, and yet you're also, if you did care of what was happening in this episode with the courtroom, with the Victoria Winter's life being on trial, if you felt that, I feel like this would have more impact. But I mean, to each their own. That's all I can say. I mean, it's still Dark Shadows. This is just, it's time to go ahead and bring everything out into the light. However, it'll still be buried into a book from 200 years later. That'll still happen. Mm-hmm. Because that's a key thing that I want to address. At least in the original show, the witch trial did happen.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know any of this, so I don't know, from you being a connoisseur of the original, if that bothers you or not. Because again, as a first watch for me, I don't know what to expect or what's good or bad. It's kind
of confusing, because everything that's being displayed right here is already implied to have happened. So it's all in the position of Phyllis Wick. The only
Yeah.
difference is that Victoria Winters is sitting back in Phyllis Wick's place.
Nice.
So what we already read about Phyllis Wick in this show, that she died a few weeks later from the flu. I'm not sure how they're going to justify that towards the end of this, but I'm going to have to wait and see. I do want to go ahead and get into the second part, because there is a little break with a scene of Josette again wanting to go to Barnabas, not being able to go to Barnabas. They're keeping them apart, and Barnabas says, they won't be able to stop us, my love. But here, the second day, it's time for the defense to go ahead and make their case. And they have a strong case. They have the actual witch, and they have witnesses to it. It's Angelique. Angelique. She's the one who has been behind this, the horrors for the Collins family, and she is the real witch. And Trask doesn't really give a shit. That's not the woman he wants dead. It's Victoria Winters. But halfway through, as it seems that maybe they're making some strong heading, you hear a small French voice saying, "May I say something?" in the distance, and out walks Angelique. She is in the flesh somehow. We know she's dead, but somehow she's made her appearance, and she is able to be her own witness, and all their claims seem to be just thrown aside just because she's alive. I go away for a couple days and everything, and everyone's accusing me of these horrible things.
I will say this: she has what we call that shit-eating grin on her face, but
Oh,
she's not
yes.
grinning, but you see it in her eyes. She's got the crazy girl eyes, and she really sells it here. I'm like, okay, I'm not rooting for the witch, which isn't supposed to be a good thing, right? Because again, the courtroom drama, it's like a snooze fest to me, and I don't care how much they try to, escalate things or whatever. Her coming in with the grand entrance and all of that. May I talk for a moment, please? It's like, okay, and it seems like it was so long ago where we saw the her up top there. It was a great scene with the assassination attempt there, and the ball disappearing but then appearing, and then her summoning it and all that. That was really cool, and it reminded of like, wow, that was a really great scene. And here she just comes in here kind of like, I just want to let everybody know that, because it's all about me, and I kind of like that in a very smarmy way.
Yes, I appreciated it too. But there's no verdict yet. They're saving it for the morning, which means they're saving it for the end of the episode. Because that night, something terrible has been predicted to happen. It is the night that Josette is going to throw herself from Widow's Hill. But before that, Barnabas is, he's like just getting ready. He's like, I am not going to take this anymore. He kind of, it's implied he uses his vampiric powers to make the Countess Natalie just drift into a deep sleep.
Don't forget, we get to hear the music box endlessly now. It's starting to get reprogrammed, right?
I love it. I love it so much. It is one of my favorite pieces of music to come from this show. But he is waiting for his Josette, and once Josette has her moment with Natalie asleep, she rises at his call, and she gets dressed in the wedding gown, and into the old house she goes. Fog fills a room that is just surrounded by candles.
Candles and fog machines. This is like the basis of really any solid 1980s heavy metal video on MTV. Back when they played music videos, which is
I
what
thought
MTV
you were loving it, because that fog machine was
I loved
working
it.
the most it ever has.
It
That
is.
entire house, you could not see the
It's a
floor.
room full of cigar smoke, and I'm
And it's
smelling
like,
it right now.
yeah, that's right. And it's like she's gliding across the room, but Angelique is not done with her cackle. She goes ahead and she is speaking into the mind of Josette, trying to hold her off, saying, Look, oh, go ahead, be with Barnabas. Join him forever as the living dead and see the monster he is. And she gets flashes of him just as his vampire self, biting, eating, feasting like an animal. But she still moves on. She goes ahead. I don't know how Angelique did it, but she finds a couple episodes ago when he was ancient and uses that footage as well. And she looks terrified, but Josette goes on. But Angelique goes ahead and
What did
strikes at the
Josette
core.
supposedly do in the past that hasn't happened yet in the past?
What?
So before we know that the whole reason why Barnabas is upset is because Josette did what?
She killed herself.
Okay, and that's not happened here yet because
No.
she when she traveled back in time, she parked her DeLorean, and it was just a few days before, and so we're saying, oh, maybe they can change time. Is it fate? Is it destiny? And of course, you're forgetting to mention his completely powdered face here, where he is absolutely, he looks like 1990s versions of vampire. But I do like her jumping off and her stunt double, looking at her shoes as she's falling down into what Widow's Peak or whatever it's called. Because again,
Let me get there. I was almost there.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Because the thing that gets to her, that Angelique is finally able to get into her humanity, is by showing the monster that she'll become. Her as a vampire.
Yeah.
And at that moment, she breaks. She can live with Barnabas being a beast, but her herself,
God
being
forbid
a
you take away
creature of the
my
night,
dignity.
killing for life, no, she can't do it. And she runs away. And that scene, I believe it was in episode 3, that Barnabas has a Vietnam flashback watching as she runs away. It's in slow motion. She's saying, "No, Barnabas, no!" Running to the edge up on Widow's Hill.
In slow motion. The wind
She,
machine's cranked. The
yep.
fog machine's rolling.
If only he was a little closer, because she throws herself off and falls down upon the rocks.
Yeah, I liked it. We don't
I
see it, and we don't have to
it's
see. We don't have to see it as the whole point. So
yeah.
that's cool. I like how Angelique is basically showing them, how they're doomed and they're cursed. So she's like, screw you guys. You don't want to hook up with me anymore. I'm going to just make life miserable for you. At some point, you figure she'd want to hook up with Hunky Man Meat or somebody else in town. There'd be like the new visitor comes in and maybe he represents a different type of supernatural stuff. And I don't know if in the real show that happened, but I keep thinking to myself, okay, what's really supposed to happen here in the end? Because Barnabas, again, he sells it really here, Ben Cross, the actor, when he's like, no, and he puts his face up and he's all grieved out or whatever, and they do the semi crash zoom into his face. I'm like, that's just good shit. So I gotta give him props for it because we see why he's a little simpy in the first few episodes going off, and we're figuring okay, but then now we're starting to see it. So we've seen a lot of different sides to him, and we're really starting to get it fleshed out. Whereas with her, she's worse than Hunky Man Meat. At least Hunky Man Meat in the past, seems kind of respectable and has a little bit of depth to him, where she's just basically I can't if you think about it. So we don't.
Wait, Vicky or Josette?
Well, they're both one and the same, right?
They're
Am I not right?
you are wrong
you
and
them,
right.
you
It's
can
you're
call them
both.
whatever you want, but Joanna Going, the actress, beautiful woman. Why does he care? Was it because she was with his child or something? I mean, they don't do anything to sit there and say they have a connection other than they just have a connection. There's no building up for it. We're just supposed to accept that. And we've seen more eroticism, more intensity of emotion, no matter what it is, between Barnabas and Angelique. Certainly not these two here. I mean, they're walking on the I mentioned several times during the what I would call the courtship early on when they're walking on the sand right underneath here too. And of course, we know we're going to see this scene several times in the whole episode, so it's a nice callback. We know what it means. So when she's running towards it, we know it. And I'm going to do radio voice here and say, that was one of the most boring courtships I've ever seen on TV because they have zero chemistry together, no matter how interesting he is as an actor and how beautiful she is as a woman. I'm looking at this to go, nope, not feeling the zap between them. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean that is
It's
partially
just
because,
facts.
see,
You were the one always saying that Dr. Hoffman seemed like she really was hot for him,
yeah,
and I could kind of see that, but I felt like she had an ulterior motive, not that she was jealous of a young woman with his attentions, and we don't know what that is. So she's another character that I go, we don't know, at least in the revivals relaunch of it, or reimaging, or whatever you want to call it, condensed nature, what it is, and I don't know what it should be. So she's another one that kind of, to me, is a lot like, Josette, where we really don't know much about her backstory. We know she's a doctor. We know she knows this stuff. Well, how does she know this stuff? What's going on? We see her do things, hold things together. She seems pretty sharp and witty. She seems like she has her own little, like I say, reasons for doing it. But after getting hinted that she has them, we never see necessarily why, or a tease or anything. So we're really kind of forced to watch this romance, really. And that's my one criticism of everything here, too. So that's why when they have the big courtroom scene that feels dragged out, it's like not believable to me. And even though she was possessed by Angelique and are trying to figure out how to make the best of this bad situation, when she comes to it, just, again, a lot of things in this episode feels very convenient. Okay, her and Willie, struggle. Willie barely overcomes her, and she conveniently hits her head, which knocks her out, which of course means, the
well, he
next scene
pushed
they
her
can have
against
her.
the wall.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I'm getting it. I'm just, like I say, this lacked a little bit of oomph to me, or whatever. Even though I feel like they packed in a lot of stuff to tie up all these ends and say, okay, this is what we're going to deal with.
I I I mean, I liked it well enough. I can see where you might not enjoy it as much as the other episodes, and I'd be inclined to agree. But at the end of the day, there's something we always say: it's still Dark Shadows. It's still good to me. Even I'll take weak Dark Shadows over no Dark Shadows any day. Um,
Well, this leaves us with one big final thing that's about to happen. So the floor is yours,
yes.
sir. The microphone is yours.
Josette Dupre is dead. That morning, it is time for the sentencing, and the court has found Victoria Winters guilty. She's asked any final statement, and it's simply that she's innocent. She's not done these things. And the judge says, very good. Anyway,
Yeah, whatever. Get it over with.
whatever. Yeah,
I'm gonna go
in
golf.
in what, 3 days from now, the 5th of whatever, you're going to be hung by the neck until you are dead. Not until dead, until you are dead. You have to draw it out, and all you can see is the horrified look upon her face as the end is near. And that's how we're left at the end of this episode.
Yeah, that whole ending, which is supposed to add even more emotional heft to it, again, don't really care, but it did remind me of a re-imaging of something I want to say from the 60s, from the original Twilight Zone, I believe it was. I don't think it was Outer Limits. And it was basically, was it Ambrose Bierce? An occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, where we see a man that we don't know what happened, but he's on a bridge and he's going to get hanged. And a bunch of people that we presume are members of the military, and the good guys, he's supposed to be a bad guy. He's supposed to get hanged. And so the rope breaks and he falls into the water. And it's basically like one really long, continuous chase scene where he somehow manages to, even though he's wounded, he's able to get the noose off of himself. He barely survives. He's going back to his plantation, it appears. So this is in the South, and it's been forever since I've read this story. And it's just a great visual watch. And he goes to meet his wife and everything else there. And then at the end, when they unload and shoot him, we go cut to the beginning, because it's a circular story. Find out that he was just having a last little flash in his head about meeting his wife and his kids, no matter what he may have did, and we'll never know. So our brain fills all this in. Great story, great little bit of cinematography there. And I kept thinking here, are we going to get some sort of bullshit like that for episode 12 here in Dark Shadows? Because even though Dark Shadows is a Dan Curtis production and not a Quinn Martin production, I'm leaving going into the last episode going, uh-oh. And I just hope it's not as weak as this episode, or forced, or whatever you want to call it. You're right, it's Dark Shadows, so it is good, but out of all the episodes, this one really didn't have anything fun or enjoyable to me, or soap opera-ish. It felt very courtroom procedural, and to me, that's not a good thing when you're going a certain way for 10, 11 episodes, and then you stop and you kind of pigeonhole it to just to kind of get to the end. It's like I said, maybe they knew they were going to get canceled in the middle of doing this, and so they were like, well, shit, we've got to wrap things up. I don't know. So maybe my view on this episode might change depending on how episode 12 goes, which it'll be interesting to discuss next week as we finish Dark Shadows, a revival from 1991 here on Xtreme TV, a sub show of the Xtreme Movie Show with I, as your host, Rob, and of course, Pixel. You get the last word.
Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to join us where the action is on Cocaine Bear next. But we ask you to remember to stay extreme and always remember that Dark Shadows is a Dan Curtis production.
Good night, all. See you in a bit on the other stream, Cocaine Bear, and episode 12 next week, 6:30 Eastern Sunday. Good night now.